plan. Blaenavon Town Council were consulted on this, and Councillor Jones, as a member of the Town Council, has a personal interest only in relation to this item. And so if I could ask Councillor Jones to confirm that interest.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm not aware of any other interest. Thank you.
Thank you. The lady in the public gallery, do you have access to the council agenda? Yes. Fine. Shall we not worry about that in those circumstances, so she's not prejudiced by that? Okay. Whichever's easiest for the men. If you want to come in the body, you're very welcome.
Come and join us.
It's just that you've got access, that's all. So you feel free to sit there. It's a little less formal than...
It's Lisbeth. She's our PhD student who's studying.
Okay, I'll have a word afterwards. Okie dokie. We then go on to item 4, confirmation of the Cabinet minutes from the 4th of September. So page 3 on your booklets, page 4, page 5, page 6, and then finally page 7. Everybody happy with those?
Yes.
And then if we just, I'm assuming the Welsh ones will be the same, so if we go through those, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then finally 12, we'll agree those. Updates on actions, item 5.
There are none.
There are none, so we'll move straight on to number 6. Nigel, interesting times. We had somebody dancing on our screens last week telling us that austerity is over, and sorry, I haven't read your script, I don't know. And obviously we've got the WRGA coming on from the budget announcement yesterday saying exactly what local government is going to get. I don't think we're going to hold our breaths that it's going to be a white knight over the white horse over the hill, but and our 25 million has still got to be tackled over the course. So well, with that lovely precursor, good luck in your report.
Thank you, Catherine. You say you just stop? No, thank you, Deputy Leader. Thank you, Deputy Leader. I assure you I'm not going to dance to Dancing Queen or anything else. I mean, this is going to seem odd, but I think despite 8 years of austerity, I think we're now entering the most difficult period in terms of financial planning and the choices that you as councillors need to make. I mean, I say that because we've got significant pay inflation. I mean, we would all support pay rises and pay inflation, especially for the most lowest paid amongst our staff, but it needs to come with funding, and that's not going to be uniformly the case. There aren't many easy choices left, if any. We're starting to see the cumulative effects of some of the changes already, such as welfare. We're starting to see some resource release, but it's going to be largely targeted at the health service and not local government. And we have in-year financial pressure, which is going to impact upon our financial standing. We did see the announcement last week of the Welsh Government's budget, and at a headline level, personally I would say it's disappointing to local government. It would appear we're facing a cash reduction again, which is in stark contrast to the health service. And the starting point for our funding seems to be the forward indication rather than any assessment of what is needed to protect our services. Funding still seems to be focused on a health service rather than a broader health system approach, something that I know the leader regularly articulates, and that would recognise the preventative role that a lot of our services play in terms of helping the health service. Disappointingly, I also think that the cash reduction is going to contain funding that the Welsh Government has received in relation to things such as teachers' pay. I regularly say within my budget reports that's the choices the Welsh Government make that are particularly keen for us, and that's going to be more and more appropriate as Welsh Government gets more resource. We're seen as a resilient sector. We have a statutory responsibility to live within our funding, and obviously I have a personal responsibility to ensure that happens, and I think that goes to sometimes the way we're treated. So we're going to get our provisional settlement today. What are we expecting? It to be difficult. To only be a one-year settlement again. I'm not personally sure how that fits with the responsibilities under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and also I couldn't get away with it. If we didn't produce a medium-term financial plan, the regulators would comment upon it and would bring it out to the attention of the Audit Committee. We're expecting at an all Wales level it to be a cash reduction, and the like-for-like reduction to be probably higher than the actual headline reduction. There will be a floor mechanism funded from outside the settlement. We're hearing noise of some additional resource for social care, but probably in the form of a specific grant. We're hearing some noise about the restoration of some of the reductions that we saw last year, and there's going to be extra capital. I don't think we're going to get much on the grant announcements today. I think that's the 23rd of October, and why those two things are dislocated, I really don't know. I think there's much more potential this year for movement between the provisional and the final, which I don't think is going to help any of us in terms of planning. But I'm sure local government's going to use that period to press its case. But we've got to make some sense of this, and we've got to move these things on, and that's largely what this report is about. In the background to the report, I put the MTFP, the 25 million, how we were planning to approach it. In the July report, a combination of percentage reductions and transformatory challenge based on policy and efficiency. That is obviously still going to guide us as we move forward. But it's important that we make the right choices with the correct amount of due diligence and thought. So we need to strike an appropriate balance between the pace and urgency that I would require and making the right choices. Transformation of itself is not going to imply any easy choices. They will be difficult and ultimately will mean job loss. And the WLGA has been clear in articulating that off the back of the budget announcement last week. In section 5 I go through the national picture. I've talked about much of that already. We have got the UK budget on the 29th of October, which is more interesting given the rather bold statement of the Prime Minister last week. I'm not sure the Chancellor's face was as happy as the Prime Minister's when she said that austerity was over. But we'll have to see. I do recognise we get our figures earlier in Wales than in England, so we ought to note that. I make the point that being better funded than our English counterparts, which is regularly something we hear, is hardly a benchmark to be celebrated given the parlous state of English local authorities now, particularly in relation to social care. There's always a lot of talk of authorities failing financially and being unsustainable. Personally, I don't think that's appropriate because we've got to live within our means. That's the statutory environment we're in. The issue of the funding is the choices that you have to make and the level of service provision that will be affected, as opposed to the authority falling over financially. So in section 6 then I try to articulate an approach for 1920 to try and achieve a balanced budget whilst allowing some time and space for the parallel transformatory work to take place. In some ways, writing these bullet points almost felt like going back to the old way we used to do budgets. So what I'm suggesting is we use the provisional settlement as a basis, however marginally better or otherwise it is. We consider any scope around council tax and the council tax base. We use the 1% and 2% reductions that we receive from services, and obviously it was 1% from social care and 1% from education, and largely 2% from everyone else, once we work through and validate those. We assume that the forecast demand that we're bringing through in the MTFP can be managed away through our early intervention and prevention work. If pressures are identified through the estimate build, which they undoubtedly will, over and above the MP, our starting point is going to be to our services, well, how will you manage those away, at least for 1920? And in doing so, it won't be about pushing demand or work to other parts of the council, because that just pushes the balloon somewhere else. and we address the in-year challenges, the multi-year savings, and we've got children's, we've got whole authority mitigation, we've got Torvine training. Whether that approach will fully mitigate 1920 pressures, we'll have to work our way through. I'm particularly concerned around children's in that sense, and that's no reflection on the considerable amounts of work that's going on within Keith's team, working with us and working with everyone else. It's just it's a particular challenge. In 6.4, I start to articulate that I'm going to be looking for savings now in advance of any investments, because we've got to stay financially safe. And then in 6.5, I highlight that all change costs and our reserves are starting to fall. So therefore, we've got to be even more forensic in how we use our reserves, making sure of the rationale and value for money. And perhaps we've got to be a little more nuanced in our distinction between service and corporate, while still, living within the spirit of what's served us well. And then the final part of the report is just the timeline between now and Christmas. And I'm happy to take any questions, Deputy Leader.
Thanks for that, Nigel. Despite my whimsy as the introduction, obviously this is a very serious point. I am grateful to you and the other members of the team, because there are some councils in Wales who face an even greater burden because they haven't faced up to it sooner, where you and your team have steered us in the right direction and we've taken those difficult decisions. That doesn't mean we haven't, and your report indicates we've still got difficult decisions to take. It's taken out 25 million over the course of this council, and that will undoubtedly lead to a reduction in services, a reduction on staff, greater pressure on those staff that remain and have to take up the I say slack, but I don't mean the people sat around doing nothing, but taking up the burden of what's left behind. So it is a serious task we have to do. Mr Drakeford, the Cabinet Secretary, said on television that he'd gone around Wales and everybody told him that health was a priority. Who wouldn't? I think we would all say that around the table. But it's the devil in the detail. For example, in my own service area, if our director wanted to play silly devils and leave people in the health service because our staff are otherwise engaged with other issues or looking at children's services, etc., that would create a greater burden on health. So it's exactly what Anthony said. You're not looking at the whole system. It's not just the health service, it's the health system. Other members around this table have equally valid causes that prevent the burden on the health service at the final point, where it becomes the most expensive in bed hours, bed days, etc., etc. So you really are, not you personally, sorry, the Welsh Government's really robbing Peter to pay Paul, and exactly as you say, you have to do, this council has to do a 3-year medium-term finance, and all you can base that on is a best guess of what happens in Cardiff the following year. That's not fair on you, and that's not fair on the people of Torvine. So despite the whimsy earlier, yes, it is serious, and we have some serious issues that we have to agree on that timeline. Can I open this up to other members if they wish to make any comments? David?
Yeah, it's deeply frustrating messaging coming from Welsh Government. I think my chair's broken. We've been told that this, we've been told to work to the principles, as you referenced yourself, and Richard's just referenced now, the Future Generations Act, which is, an increasingly obvious but strong piece of legislation which I absolutely buy into. But at the same time, they're not enabling us to do that. They hold the keys to that. The health system, I've raised this point before and I'm almost fed up saying it really. The NHS budget for Wales is growing as a proportion of the overall spending of Welsh Government is growing, and the trend seems to be continuing. So I think I referenced in 2010 the proportion of the NHS spend was something like 35%, and then in 2015 or whenever I first raised it, it was about 40-something, and then it was projected to be about 50-something% in 2020, I think, which it just shows you where we're going. It shows you that the NHS, that trend is just going to continue until we do something differently. And in reference to your point, there's more than one way to skin a cat when we're talking about helping the NHS, because we do help the NHS. A lot of what we do, as Nigel's already referenced, is preventing people from needing the NHS in the first place. And, that's what we need to do more of. That's what the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is telling us that we need to do. Yet they seem to be taking the... we all want to invest in the NHS, but they're doing it in the most sort of populist way, in a way. And it's very frustrating, because, we're doing everything we can. We're investing in the early intervention and prevention, and we would do much more if we were able to do that. So it's just very frustrating.
No, it's a very valid point. Anybody else, David?
That's a bit of a Doctor Who of this one. Following on from that, what frustrates me, and frustrate isn't a strong enough word in many senses, but we have to be pretty measured in the language that we use. And it's tied into the Wellbeing of Future Generations Bill as well, because whilst you referenced very eloquently earlier on that you have to have a plan going forward that covers several years rather than what the Welsh Assembly Government seem to be doing is every year there is this settlement. That bedevils the measured way we should be looking at and need to be looking at the wellbeing of future generations, but even more deeply than that, how we husband our resources. There is this gap between what they do, what we have to do, and surely that must be creating not just frustration, but a practical problem, a practical issue. I just wonder what their explanation is for doing it in that untimely fashion.
I mean, we regularly raise it with civil servants. They come back with answers along the lines of you have access to all the same information that we have by which to forecast. Of course, the one thing I don't have access to is the political choices that are going through elected members. Whenever it's referred in political meetings, it's always about the UK government. It's always about the political choices at the time and waiting for the autumn statement, etc., etc. But there's just a failure to recognise that the further down the chain you go, that the requirements actually get more onerous because of the regulators. So they don't really have an answer for it other than say they know we would like them and they're disappointed they can't give them. It's just simply we wouldn't get away with it as an authority. And the bit they also, particularly I only talk to civil servants, but the civil servants, they really don't get the difficulty for elected members in making choices when the forward forecasts are so uncertain. And during these 8 years we've had forward forecasts of -1% that turns into -4, forward forecasts of -4 that turn into a lot less. Last year it was -1, and now it could be something, a little bit better than -1. How are you supposed to make the difficult choices and live with them when it fluctuates? And there's no understanding, particularly within the civil service, that that's a real problem, and it's a problem for me in persuading you to make the changes and the choices.
Can I draw members' attentions then to the recommendation on page 20 that it's recommended that the Cabinet note the report and endorse the approach outlined in paragraph 6 above. Members happy so to do? Thank you. If we
in spite of the eloquence of the Director of Finance, I hope the next report might shed a little bit of sunshine. I suppose in a sense it could be seen as a red letter day, because this morning's report is one of several that we'll be bringing to Cabinet over the next few months regarding the proposal by the Archdiocese in Cardiff to create a 3 to 16 school all-inclusive, which will replace Our Lady of the Angels and St David's primary school, Roman Catholic primary schools, as well as St Albans Roman Catholic secondary school. The funding proposal for this has been approved provisionally by Welsh Assembly Government because it was contained in their 21st Century Schools Programme Band B submission. What remains for the diocese to do now is to create a detailed plan going forward, and in this process they will be ably supported by officers from Torfaen County Borough Council. This report this morning is the first of two stages of the business case. The final business case will be put before Cabinet in the fullness of time. I think it's worth commenting here that the funding for developing a proposal for the voluntary aided sector schools, which this is considerably, quite significantly different from that which we experience when it comes to schools in the maintained sector. In the maintained sector, what we have is effectively a 50-50 split, where the Welsh Assembly Government provide half of the funding, total funding, and the other half is provided by the local authority. In this particular case this morning, what we have is an 85% contribution from the Welsh Assembly Government, and the remaining 15% is contributed in the main by the diocese itself, but there will be a financial contribution from Torfaen County Borough Council, which will be capped at no more than £1 million. The business case, as important as it is, constitutes just one element of the total process, because, as you would appreciate, with the dramatic change in the circumstances of the three schools mentioned, itself it will draw down a statutory consultation process which will, I'm sure, robustly test the merits or otherwise of the proposal, and indeed in that sense, unless the consultation process concludes that this is a project worth pursuing, then it won't happen. In any event, we expect the consultation process to take place later on this year, and I can assure you that I will be bringing back to Cabinet some form of progress report as and when it's appropriate. That said, I'll finish there and I'll hand over to John, who will, I'm sure, be bursting at the seams to put some detail onto the bones of my introduction. John.
Thank you, Councillor John. The format for this process is a well-trodden process for us. So it's a business case in the first instance. The difference with this one, of course, is it is the Archdiocese who's making this proposal, but they have to route it through the Council. And it would come to you anyway and go to Council at some point as well in the future because of the capital contribution that we hope to put into the final business case. So the strategic case, ordinarily, we would write. I can tell you that the Archbishop himself has pretty much written the strategic case for this document, and it's very much rooted in the wider thinking about Roman Catholic education in the country and more widely still, I understand. So we're very much in the back seat on the strategic side. They know what they want to do. They've elaborated on that in this document, and I dare say that when it comes to the consultation, they'll do something similar, if not even more depth to it. But what are we talking about? We're talking essentially that they have currently 35% of confirmed Roman Catholics in their two primary schools that are affected by this report, 40% in their secondary school. They want to create a 3 to 16 provision, which will be a little bit smaller in overall capacity between the two. But in essence, closing Our Lady of the Angels, St David's and St Albans, creating a 315 school. In effect, 315 at primary and in 600 at secondary, but it's an all-through school. So you don't actually have, there isn't a primary and secondary. It is an all-through school. Obviously, new build. It will be on a site which the Archdiocese is currently considering its options around at the moment, so I can't tell you where it will be. But before this goes for consultation, the advice to the Archdiocese is we must be able to tell people where it's going to be. They won't be able to sensibly comment on it otherwise. So that's detail that will come through later on in the process, but not too late. We think at the moment it will be possible to do it and have it open for September of 2022, but this is extremely complicated. A number of schools changing the nature of the Roman Catholic education. We need to take an approach to this as we did, or rather the Archdiocese needs an approach to this like we did with Crossy Caelog. We need to start to manage the numbers down beforehand. Otherwise you'll end up having to build something much bigger than you need. And the Archdiocese, well, the schools themselves are their own admissions bodies, so they will have to drive that. So I say 2022 at the moment. I'm going to hold to that as long as I possibly can, but please be mindful it's complicated. There's lots that can move, so we'll keep you updated on that as we go through. Councillor Yole has told you about the funding. And yes, it's an unusual one to have a significant contribution from Welsh Government, but also the Archdiocese contributing. And really, there's not a great deal else that I wanted to add to this, but I'm more than happy to take questions. Thank you.
Any questions? Yeah.
It's not a question, it's more of a statement. Oh Christ, it's a hole in the floor.
Yeah, I know, we fall down.
Sorry.
Rolled it there, it's the person that sat in it.
It is, yeah, there's an argument to that. So I was a former pupil of St David's and St Albans, so I've obviously got quite nostalgic and good memories of both schools, but I think this is overwhelmingly good news because even whilst I was a pupil there, the state of the buildings, whilst the education was excellent, the state of the buildings were far from ideal. So I can only imagine what they are like at the moment. So I think this is overwhelmingly good news, and I'm really pleased. As good as the memories were at those schools that I attended, I think this is excellent for pupils coming forward. So welcome it definitely.
Thank you. Mandy?
Can I come back on that?
Yeah.
Actually, but it's just the business case itself clarifies the condition of these sites at the moment, and I think I need to just point out that certainly Our Ladies and St David's is in a condition which is not actually dissimilar to a lot of our schools, and those schools largely will be up in Band C, but what's really driving this one is the condition of St Albans. St Albans in large parts is moving to what they call a Category D, which is the worst of 4 categories for condition. It's not at the point where the building is like to fail, but it's going to take increasing resources to prevent it from moving to the position where it could fail. So St Albans is the one that's driving on the condition front.
Could I just comment, Mandy, on that? The last time I talked to Mike Cody before he left our employment, we talked in his office in the original building, the convent building, and when we left there he said we're now leaving the old building and we are moving down to the new building, and the new building was in a considerably worse condition than the old convent building, which was in bad enough condition. So that just sort of underlines the point that John was making. St Albans is in desperate need of improvement.
Andy?
Yeah, I was just not only in the conditions, but it's important to just note that all too often the council are blamed for closing more schools and, making conditions better, but the people don't want their schools to be closed. But it's important it's not the council this time, it is the actual church who are pushing us forward.
Yes, it is.
In terms of catchment area, because many of the children and the current older pupils particularly do seem to come from well outside of Torfaen. From when I've been to the school and talking to pupils, I've been quite surprised how far some of them travel.
Yes, sorry, are you talking specifically about St Albans?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I mean, the catchment is, it's a regional school, so we do attract learners across from the top end of Monmouth. That's largely where people come from, other than in Torby. This is a shift. We don't know quite yet what the geography will be, how it will impact on people, but that's why we need to know the location when we go to consult with people, because it will influence use. But what we'll do again, I can't tell you what the outcome of this exercise will be, but we'll map where all of the learners are. But at the moment, I'm pretty confident I know where most of the learners travel from, and it will be undoubtedly a situation that won't suit everybody, but if it suits the majority and it means a project can go ahead, then the Archdiocese will have to decide whether or not it wants to continue with it. But let's wait for the detail. I think is probably the best answer to that one.
Right, I'm pleased to present to Cabinet the new management plan for the Blenavon World Heritage Site. The plan sets out a strategy and framework for decision making and action within the site that will enable the continued protection, conservation, presentation and transmission of the site's outstanding universal value over the planned period. The plan has been subject to partner, stakeholder and public consultation and will be kept under review. As members will recall from the recent member seminar on the World Heritage Site, this is the third management plan for the site, and it very much seeks to build upon successes already achieved by the two previous management plans over the past 18 years. I am therefore pleased to recommend approval of the plan by the Cabinet. I will pass you over to Rachel.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I think it's important for Cabinet to realise that this is a really important document. The Council made a huge commitment, in the late 1990s to bid for and then be successful in 2000 to gain World Heritage status. It is not something which people get every day. There's only 31 sites within the UK, and our site and our partnership working, which is represented in the plan, is an internationally held up as best practice of how to manage World Heritage sites. I think the endorsement of the plan today keeps our commitment alive and indicates to our partners and also potential funders that we are committed to this long-term journey, which we obviously embarked upon over 20 years ago. And I think we'll still other people in 20 years' time will still hopefully be going through those same processes. I think it's important for Cabinet to note that the leadership role for the World Heritage Site completely sits with this Council. We are the lead organisation and have to facilitate and lead the partners through this process, which isn't easy. It's very complex because we're trying to achieve multiple outcomes with this plan. The plan sets out an overall vision, which is for the continued exploration, enjoyment and learning of the journey and the tale that South Wales gave to the Industrial Revolution. So whilst it is based on Blenavon, it gives the overall valley story of the Industrial Revolution. It is also a holistic plan. It looks to deliver against economic, environment, cultural and social well-being objectives. So again, trying to meet multiple outcomes for the delivery of this plan, which again sometimes makes it unique compared to some of the other World Heritage sites which are sort of within the UK. The plan is underpinned by a suite of policies, mainly linked to governance, caring for the environment, exploring and enjoying the historical landscape, that's the infrastructure, as well as then promoting community and citizen learning, and that spans from school age all the way through to everyone in the community. The policies are defined into short and long-term actions, and there's like a suite of very clear actions which are smart, they're measurable, and which then relates to which organisation is responsible for delivering them. It also identifies the funding which might be needed. A lot of the facilitation is done within the core revenue resources of the council. Linked to the previous report, there is no funding request linked to this. The ongoing success of the partnership has been on its drawing down of funding to secure improvements within the area. I think, what we do have to do with this plan is demonstrate how we will maintain, as Councillor Jones said, the outstanding universal value. That's something which UNESCO insist upon. And again, we have been held up as best practice. We've been able to demonstrate all that we do contributes to the wider outcomes. I think we're quite clear with the suite of actions. There's lots of success to build upon, but we have still some key challenges. A main one is about the town centre and how we get that translation from massive visitor numbers to Big Pit and the World Heritage Site into the town and the town centre regeneration itself. The recent Heritage Lottery funding that we've secured of over 2 million for continued improvement into the town centre goes some way to addressing that. And what we need is to then work with businesses and the community to invest in and also then use the facilities that are being put into the town centre as well. We have identified 5 risk areas that need addressing through the plan, which may have an impact particularly on the outstanding universal value. The first one is, it's quite high, it's on a mountain. Energy generation could be a positive, but could also have a negative impact in terms of visual blight on the World Heritage. So that's one which is being monitored and worked through should proposals for wind energy come forward in particular. Water erosion, it rains a lot up there, and it can have a big impact on the natural landscape and on the environment, because this is a massive site, and so we have to constantly look at the water management and erosion and impact on the historical landscape. It's a prime area for off-roading and motorbiking, which again harms the natural and historic environment, which we are trying to protect and conserve. And obviously, part of our security is trying to keep investing in securing the infrastructure of the many, listed buildings that we have in the area to keep them so we can keep the infrastructure whole and have integrity. And we also have some natural environment management issues with regards to bracken, which we work with the local community on. So they're the 5 key risk areas which I've identified, and the plan identifies how, with partners, we'll be seeking to mitigate those. I think, I have to say huge thanks to our partners who've contributed massively to this development, and they're going through all their channels to sign off this plan as well. And again, the partnership model has been held up as best practice, not only by Welsh Government, but by Heritage UK and also UNESCO. I think, on a final note, the plan is a complete team effort, but I think, have to draw attention of Cabinet to one officer individual, and that's Rebecca Hartley. She has led and facilitated this, and due to her work on this, she was asked to be a leader for Heritage UK, which she is now participating in, which is great for us as a council, but, and also for our reputation on how we manage World Heritage. The bid she submitted to HLF, they don't often give feedback, and their feedback was this was one of the best bids they've ever received in terms of its thoroughness and business case for investment. So I would like just to say, that for Cabinet to thank Rebecca for this, because it is a good job. Well done.
Yeah, I'd just like to pay my thanks to Rachel and Rebecca. They've done a fantastic job, and the support they've provided for me is just unbelievable, I must be honest, and compliments. I'm glad to have a good team working with me. Thank you.
I think it is important, because World Heritage isn't just a badge, and it isn't something that's given lightly, and UNESCO are quite as happy to take it away if people don't adhere to their strict requirements. I think it is a success, and Rebecca's enthusiasm and professionalism just shines. She does a fantastic job up there. The privilege of being responsible, I took over from Neil Lewis, God bless him, and to see it to go from strength to strength. I think it's one of the most successful sites in the UK, certainly in what's anticipated and what you've just said about the recognition we get for it. If we can get it to work to bring people into the town and use the town as well, that's just the icing on the cake, and give Blenavon its due recognition there. So I do commend the report to the members. Does anybody else have a comment before I go to the recommendation? The recommendation's on page 80, and it is that the Cabinet approves the Blenavon Industrial Landscape World Heritage Site Management Plan 2018 to 2023. Are we all happy with that? Somebody used to say I'd put two hands up to it. I think that's certainly something I would do on that. Exercise, and Lynn will take us through that. Lynn?
Thank you, members. This is a standard report that comes to Cabinet each year, and it's asking you to agree the appointments to a number of joint committees and partnerships as set out in Appendix 4 of the Council's Constitution. This year, as Councillor Clark referred to, a number of the partnerships have either morphed into other bodies or have ceased to be in existence. So the appendix attached to the report actually reflects the changes that are needed to the Constitution. That needs to be referred to Council, so there is also a recommendation asking or informing Cabinet that a report will be taken to Council, seeking delegated authority for the monitoring officer in consultation with the Members' Constitution Working Party to make those changes to Appendix 4 of the Constitution. So what we're asking you today is to agree the names of the appointments as set out in Appendix A of the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. And with due apologies, because you very kindly showed me this report before it came on the Cabinet, can I just make a couple of amendments? The Cardiff City Region Transport Authorities have already said Fiona's representing us on that body. It's down as Anthony there, which I should have picked up sooner, so can we amend that to reflect that it's Fiona Cross? The Cardiff Capital Region, it should be the Regional Cabinet, not the Joint Authority, and by virtue of the fact that if Anthony doesn't attend, he does need somebody to attend instead of him, and that lucky person is my good self. So in addition to changing it to the Regional Cabinet, could we have myself to substitute for the leader? And my profound apologies, because you did show me this report and I didn't pick that up on those, that particular point. Anybody else got any comments? Mrs. Griff?
Thank you. Just out of interest, what has replaced the Welsh Purchasing Consortium?
I honestly don't know, to my knowledge. We just know that that's no longer in existence.
The National Procurement Service, which is currently being fundamentally reviewed by the Welsh Government.
So nothing's happening on that scene at the moment, because I've never been called to any meeting at any time.
On the National Procurement Service?
On the Purchasing Consortium, which I was appointed to sort of last year. Yes, which is why I'm asking, is there something to replace it?
It's been replaced by the National Procurement Service, which is basically a collaborative effect with the Welsh Government run by Gary Wills to do the procurement, but it's itself running to some bodies and has been reviewed. But I wouldn't expect you to be called to that sort of thing.
No, okay, fine.
Okay, if there are no other comments or observations, I'll take you to the recommendations on page 264. It's recommended that Cabinet agrees to the appointments to joint committees and partnerships listed in Appendix A to this report, and perhaps if we put something as amended verbally. These appointments have an immediate effect until Cabinet next amends them or the next local government elections, and European and regional affairs and equalities matters continue to be dealt with at meetings of the full Cabinet rather than by subcommittee. And then the second point there, as Lynn said, it's also recommended the Cabinet notes the need for a report to be submitted to full Council to seek delegated authority for the monitoring officer in consultation with members' Constitutional Working Party to update the Council's constitution to reflect the joint committees and partnership bodies currently in operation as outlined in Appendix A. Members happy for that to be so? Thank you all. And